Washington Journal continues.
Our guest, Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Pedro.
People probably have seen you in action, but if you would, for maybe those who don't know, what is Code Pink, and especially how did it get its name?
Well, we started during the Bush years when there was the color-coded alert. Remember the yellow, the orange, red, and we felt that it was actually designed to justify more violence, and we thought we needed to de-escalate the violence, and that a Code Pink was a call to look for other ways to deal with problems in the world.
And so the purpose of the organization generally?
Well, we started out trying to stop the war in Vietnam. At that point, there was a lot of fervor for going to war, and we thought it was actually our patriotic duty to be dissidents, to get up there and say, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, we shouldn't invade. And we continue to this day to be a voice of people saying, let's look for, and to get up there and say, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, we shouldn't invade. And we continue to this day to be a voice of people saying, let's look for nonviolent ways and let's use our resources to rebuild this country.
So what's the official take on Syria when it comes to your organization?
Well, we are very opposed to a U.S. military intervention. We feel that this will not help the Syrian people. Some of us, including myself, have actually been to Syria and the border just when this war started breaking out and when the refugees started pouring into Turkey, and we realized that there was a crisis. We thought we should really be helping the refugees. We should be calling on the international community to intervene by calling for peace negotiations. That didn't happen. And we have been saying ever since that it's important to find nonviolent ways, including an arms embargo, including ceasefire, including negotiations, help for the refugees, that would be positive for the Syrian people, not escalating the violence.
Because this has been talked about as a humanitarian effort, especially for those who died from chemical attacks, is it hard to relate that what happened in Syria, especially when it comes to the men, women, and children, to concerns and your protest of Syria and your opposition against that?
Well, we're concerned about the deaths in Syria from anything, whether it's chemical weapons or conventional weapons. There's been way too many deaths. And I think if we take it from a perspective of what will decrease the violence, what will lead to a solution, everybody says, even President Obama, that there's got to be a political settlement. But we think an invasion will actually make it harder to get a political settlement, will lead to more Syrians dying. And I think this is the sentiment that we're hearing from around the country.
What do you think about the stand that the president's taken on this?
I think it's a shame that he has given his word that there is this red line now and feels that he has to move forward on that in a military way. I think that it's hard for a president to back down at this point, but this is not about saving face for the president. This is about what is the best thing for the United States, what's best for Syria, what's best for the world community. And I think the president is wrong on this one, and we, the people, have to step up and say that our red line is a different red line. Our red line is looking at all of the problems we have in this country and how we're going to address those problems, and how are we going to deal with the international community according to legal means. And Pedro, it's very strange to me to hear the president saying that we will go intervene in Syria in a way that is against, President saying that we will go intervene in Syria in a way that is against what the UN is calling for, what the Secretary General is calling for, what international law says, because Syria has violated international law. That's not the way you do things.
The argument at the UN that is Russia's going to veto it anyway because of their support for Syria, so...
The U.S. hasn't even played that one out, hasn't brought all its evidence that it has to the Security Council, much less to the American public. There is much we don't know about this and would like to know. And then given a chance for the world community to see, with this overwhelming evidence that President Obama says he has, what will the Russians and the Chinese do? Take it to the Security Council.
Guest Medea Benjamin with Code Pink to talk about Syria, their efforts against military action there. And you can ask your questions on one of three lines this morning. For Democrats, it's 202-585-3880. For the Republicans, 202-585-3881. For Independents, 202-585-3880. 3882. As far as your efforts are going these days, how do they compare back when you were active on Iraq?
Well, in Iraq, we had more time to build up, and so we actually built up very quickly, and the peace movement grew to where we could have demonstrations with hundreds of thousands of people out in the streets. This is happening now under a Democratic administration. It's happening very quickly. But I must say, Pedro, I'm really proud of the American people, because without organizations so much pushing them, they have spontaneously risen up throughout the United States and said to their representatives, listen to what the people are saying. The polls are overwhelming, as you know, against going to war. And when I have been going into the offices of Congress people, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, the phones are ringing off the hook, and it's almost entirely saying don't go to war. So this is really a spontaneous rebellion. We're calling it a peace insurrection by people who come from very different ideological spectrums, and I think it's a very positive thing that the American people are doing.
There was a BuzzFeed piece which shows your co-founder, Jody Evans, I guess is the picture, but the headline says, anti-war left stays quiet on Syria. With less money and fewer members, anti-war groups struggle to effectively protest the imminent war.
Well, I think that was actually a week ago, and things have changed considerably in just a week's time. And it's amazing to see how groups have quickly responded to this, and they're getting their members re-energized. They're getting tens and tens of thousands of calls into their constituents, into their elected officials, and I think we're seeing in the next couple of days an amazing level of activity with a very short time to have organized it. There will be vigils on Monday throughout the country at 7 o'clock. There's a protest that's happening in Washington, D.C. this afternoon that will probably be large, and there's others around the country. There is a lot of movement happening, but I must say that that's just one particular piece of it, the more traditional anti-war peace movement. What we're seeing is really much, much larger than that. Because as you've seen from people calling in on the Republican line, this really crosses ideologies as nothing has before that I have seen in my lifetime. And it is really interesting that it doesn't so much take now a peace movement that might consider itself coming from a progressive end of the Democratic Party, because there's a lot of divisions within the progressive end of the Democratic Party. This is coming from a very broad spectrum, and I think that's very healthy.
Is it difficult for that progressive end then to do what they're doing, especially with the president they have in the White House?
I think for some groups it's been very difficult. We see even yesterday the Center for American Progress hosting Samantha Power, the UN representative, who came to continue the sales pitch for war. And some of us were outside there protesting. Now, this is a liberal democratic organization, a think tank, where we have gone many times to hear many interesting discussions. And we thought, all right, if you're having her, at least have somebody else on the other side. Have it be a real debate. She didn't even take questions. So you're seeing, yes, it's difficult for groups that tie themselves to a Democratic Party, but groups like mine, Code Pink, were never tied to the Democratic Party, although Republicans during the Bush years used to accuse us that. It's not true, and I think they've seen over these years, and it's not just been about Syria. We've been out protesting the Obama administration about its drone warfare for the past years. We've been one of the strongest groups saying this violates international law, this is killing a lot of innocent people, and so we think it's important to protest our government no matter who is in the White House.
So we'll talk about your tactics and how you do things in a little bit, but you have some calls lined up for you. So our first call for Medea Benjamin is...
No matter who is in the White House.
So we'll talk about your tactics and how you do things in a little bit, but you have some calls lined up for you. So our first call for Medea Benjamin is Sherry. This is Port St. Lucie, Florida, Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're on, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi. I agree with Ms. Benjamin. I think that we need to stay out of these wars. I think that this is Obama's personal agenda. I read his books. In his second book, in his first chapter, he states, if the political wind should ever change, I would have to go with my Muslim brothers. Now, with that said, and these are his words, not mine, I don't trust this president. I don't believe about the sarin gas. I watched this past week, the Attorney General for the UN state. They don't really know it's sarin. number one. Number two, they're not sure who's using it, what side is using it. And I agree with Ms. Benjamin. Also, American people across the board do not want this. We've been making many, many calls to our senators. We don't want it. We're tired of being used. We go in, we spend our money, and they hate us anyway. One more thing I'd like to say, China has a lot of interest. Why doesn't China go take care of it? In Afghanistan, they have all the rights to their minerals
Okay.
for
Well,
$30 billion.
thank you, caller. We'll let our guest respond.
Well, the Muslim world is very divided on this, and I would say the vast majority of Muslims are against the U.S. going in. In fact, the largest Muslim country in the world, Indonesia, has come out just at these G20 talks against the U.S. military attack. But I would agree with the sentiment of the caller in the sense that this doesn't make sense for the United States to get involved in. And that I hope the American people won't be swayed by remarks that the president makes on Tuesday when he continues his sales pitch to the American people. I hope that the American public will hold firm in saying that there are times when we have to go up against our presidents, whether it's a George Bush or a President Obama, and say that we, the American people, actually have a gut feeling that this is not right for us. We've seen what's happened with the U.S. intervention over these 11 years and how it's actually been bad for the Muslim world. So let's keep up that spirit of saying no to this war.
Have you been surprised by the reaction of Congress?
I've been surprised by all of the different factions that have come out, and I've been I understand how hard it is for a number of members of Congress because some of them are Republicans who usually go for a military solution, and they are continuing to go for military solution. But then, of course, there are the small government Republicans as well as the Tea Party Republicans and more libertarians who have taken a very strong stand against this. On the Democratic side, you find a reluctance. There are people like Nancy Pelosi that's supposed to be a leader in her party. She has come out to support the president, but her district is very much against this. And I know she is hearing an earful from the people in her district. And she has said, well, I'm not going to be pushing this very much within the party. So I think the Democrats have a really conflicted internal time about this where they feel some loyalty to the president, and this is certainly true within the Black Caucus and even in the Progressive Caucus. But then, you know, they are elected by their people, and they're supposed to be listening to their constituents.
Ed is up next. Greenbelt, Maryland, Democrats line. Go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, Pedro. Yeah, Pedro. This is music to my ears, Ms. Benjamin, what she is bringing forth, and I believe that we have our own red line right here in this country. I'm a proud African-American scientist, and let me explain to you what I think the real problem here is. I'm glad the president went to the Congress. Now it's in the ballpark of the Congress, and they're going to have to act now. I'm supportive of my president, but however, I disagree with him on this issue. I believe we have many problems to solve right here in this country. Let me tell you what the problem here is. These are very advanced systems. The Navy has the Tomahawk cruise missiles. These devices can deliver a payload, thousands of pounds of high explosives to targets anywhere in the world. When you press a button, they will go right to the point. Problem here is these systems have the capability of striking targets. I mean, we can go after targets, but however, there could be mistakes and errors made, and this could plunge us into diverse problems and wars, and something could go wrong here. But
Thanks, caller.
Well, yes, I agree.
Diverse problems and wars, and something could go wrong here. But
Thanks, caller.
Well, yes, I agree with the caller that there are unknown consequences that could be absolutely disastrous, whether it's hitting the wrong target and releasing some of these chemical gases that would lead to deaths of more civilians, or whether it's just the hornet's nest of the U.S. getting involved in a civil war that is so complicated. I mean, we already know on the rebel side there are many groups affiliated to al-Qaeda that are part of this. And we certainly don't want to be seen strengthening those groups, but that is probably a consequence. And then there is just the region. Already the U.S. is now asking unessential personnel from Lebanon to leave that country.